Thank you. Yes, and greetings from Brussels. I am originally from Finland, but today based in Brussels. And I'm going to talk about marine spatial planning and whether there is space for nature in the marine spatial plans, more from the EU perspective. Next slide, please. So in January this year, WWF gave out a position paper, which you see here on the screen, and I've also provided the link for you there. This position paper is about achieving ecosystem-based marine spatial plans, and the idea is to support and guide countries and regions to produce these ecosystem-based marine spatial plans. Not that much support was readily available, and this is what we wanted to provide. Next slide, please. So the main asks in this paper are that the goals set out in these plans would be measurable. And as we've already seen from the case studies that the other speakers presented, a lot of the times these were in fact included. We see that this is an important thing to be able to measure how the plan is proceeding and whether it's successful. Another very important point is that cumulative impact assessments need to be done for the entire lifespan of new activities planned. So let's say for planning offshore wind farms, you need to take into account not only the construction and operational phase, but also the decommissioning phase at the end of the lifespan of the product. And the environmental impact assessment as well as the strategic environmental assessments are both very important tools. We're especially stressing the strategic environmental assessments taken beforehand the planning. We're mentioning vulnerability assessments, and as we already heard from previous speakers, precautionary principle is already being adapted in many cases, but unfortunately not everywhere. So where we don't have enough data and where we don't have access to these nice maps that Luke just presented, we still need to proceed with the precautionary principle. The overall aim is that we support a sustainable blue economy. So the financial flow towards sustainable solutions needs to be supported. In practice, this would mean wherever you do the plan that you support things like offshore wind farm development instead of oil and gas to make sure that we are developing our common seas in the right direction. We're also talking in this position paper about the process, and this is really important. The process needs to be transparent. You need to have all parts of the process available for all stakeholders. You need to include all stakeholders throughout the process. I like the way Shannon put it in her presentation that buy-in is key and that the plans do not have to be very good before you start talking to the stakeholders. And I wholeheartedly support this, and I'm glad to see that it's being done in practice. The process needs to also be iterative, so it's not a plan we make and keep forever. It needs to be able to adapt to changes caused by the environment, by climate change, but also by changes in how we use the ocean ourselves. And cross-border consultation is a key as well, because the ocean knows no borders. National borders are something we have drawn on the maps, but they're not really there for the ecosystem. Next slide, please. So, final point. It must align with other marine legislation. And as you can see in this horrendogram, there is a lot of this. This horrendogram shows all marine legislation that is out there, and I've circled the MSP directive in pink and just a few of the other legislations that somehow touch upon the MSP directive and the work. I've circled them in black. So you'll see that there's the Common Fisheries Policy, there's the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and also the Habitats and Species under the Birds and Habitats Directive. So it's important that there's no discrepancy between these two, between not just the two, but all of the directives we have there. And this is why we think that the MSP should be binding, because if it's not a binding process on national level, then these directives will easily, or other existing directives will easily override it. Next slide, please. And just to share with you an example where how this might happen. These are examples from Danish waters shared with me by my Danish colleagues. And on this map, you'll see the Natura 2000 sites and some of the features that they are protecting. So you'll see porpoises protected, reefs, bubbling reefs, birds, and areas where you protect both porpoises and reefs. The challenge is that a lot of these areas and already designated Natura 2000 sites, they overlap with the habitats which are most suitable and most lucrative for bottom trawling activities. So here we have the first challenge, and which we would hope that the marine spatial planning process would help solve. This data comes from a few years ago, and in the next slide you'll see the solution. So here, the result, what happened, I'll talk you through these maps. On the left-hand side, you see the maps for existing sites, and on the right-hand side, you see the North Sea, and you see the ships going all around there. Now, the striped area, the very large area with thin red stripes, that is the Natura 2000 sites. Within the area, you have in orange what is sandbanks, you have in green and blue what are stone reefs, and in pink you'll have bubbling reefs. And all of these habitats are protected in Annex 1 under the Habitats Directive. So what the approach here was that even though you have Natura 2000 sites protecting them, there's actually a feature-based approach, which means that you protect the features and they have a buffer zone around them. And as you just saw when the ships started moving around, is that in fact, they get to trawl all over the sites, and there you see them going again in between the different reefs and sandbanks. And this boils down to the fact that what is a Natura 2000 site actually offers very fragmented protection, and it doesn't really protect from edge effects from trawling. So while 18% is protected, only 2% of this surface is protected against bottom trawling. And here, this is a typical example of where bottom trawling, which falls under the Common Fisheries Policy, overrides Habitat Directive and the protection, environmental protection that should be provided by that. This is why we would like to see that the MSP plans being done in the countries are very strong and binding. Next slide, please. So at the EU level, the way we're looking at this right now, we are trying to learn from countries also outside of EU, like the ones we've heard today. And at the EU level, we're of course working towards the deadline, which is March next year, for all the marine spatial plans to be final. Some of them are already completed, and we're having our eyes on the process on those which are not. We're quite concerned whether the natural values will get equal treatment with the other sectors, or will economic interests override the need to ensure space for nature. We're also concerned about the cross-border consultations. I've heard firsthand about cases where a country made their marine spatial plan, they proceeded to the cross-border consultation, and they sincerely hoped that they would not get any very difficult feedback, to put it in their words, because they didn't have any room in the process left to make any changes to their plans. And this effectively renders the cross-border consultation to a paper exercise. So as challenging as it is to make marine spatial plans and make them very suitable for your neighboring countries as well, it is very important to have this in mind when you start planning, that the plan needs to be flexible still at that stage for the cross-border consultation to make any sense. And finally, we're quite worried also about how the national marine spatial plans will reflect other interests of the ministries in charge in this process. So throughout the EU countries, there are different types of ministries who have been put in charge. For example, in Portugal, it's the Sea Ministry. In Finland, it's the Environmental Ministry, and in Italy, it's the Transport Ministry. And the previous knowledge and expertise and the ability of these ministries to involve stakeholders might be reflected in the plans. And we're concerned whether the ecosystem-based approach will be adhered to regardless. Next slide, please. And to round off with some unfortunate timing news, the EU Commission will present its offshore wind strategy this year in October, and that is, if I counted it correctly, 5 months before the marine spatial plans deadline. So this is a bit in the wrong order. It'll be very hard for the marine spatial plans, which are already, of course, started, to take this into account. So this will then just have to feed into the next round, but it's quite natural that the offshore wind strategy will have an impact on the marine spatial planning as well. Next slide. That was it for me. Thank you for your attention.